Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tamara Bingham Noyes. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Center for Change. I'm joined by Dr. Julie T. and Dr. Ashley Southard, friends of Center for Change and friends of mine and amazing clinicians in Arizona. And we're so excited to have them with us and excited for you to be able to hear the presentation that they have for you all today. We're going to do just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we turn it over to Dr. Ine and Dr. Southard. So we'll go through this really quickly so that they can get started. I know they have a ton of content to share today. And then I'll remind you at the end of the webinar about what's going to happen in terms of taking the post-test. So let's start with, there's a copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of your toolbar. You're welcome to look at that, or you can download it. Obviously, Dr. Southard and Dr. Ine are going to show the slides to you, but if you need to download the PowerPoint, you're welcome to do that so you can reference it later. A copy of the post-test is also in that same handout section of the toolbar. This is for reference only. In order to obtain continuing education credit, you must take the test online and you'll receive your certificate through that process. And I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. But you're welcome to download or take a look at the post-test throughout the presentation so you can keep an eye out for those test questions. You're welcome to submit questions in the questions section of the toolbar. We'll try to get to a few of those at the end of the webinar. So feel free to type in those questions. I'll keep an eye on them throughout. And then when we're finishing up at the end, then I'll pop back on. I'll talk to the doctors about the questions that have been submitted, and we'll try and answer a few before the end of the webinar. Then once the webinar ends, there's an evaluation that will pop up on your screen. It automatically pops up when I close out the webinar. If you take just 1 minute to complete that evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for Center for Change. It's completely anonymous, so please feel free to be candid in that feedback. It helps us know the kind of information that you'd like to have in the future. So if you take just a minute to complete that, that'd be wonderful. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you will get a separate email from GoToWebinar. It will look similar to the email you got when the confirmation email you received when you registered. You'll get a separate email about an hour after the webinar ends with the link to take the online test. Once you take the online test and pass it, the certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. If you don't see it on your screen, check your downloads file because sometimes it hides in there. Okay, that's it for housekeeping. We are ready to roll. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Ine and Dr. Southard. So give me just a second to send it your way. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Yay.
Let's make sure that we have.
And once you launch it, there we go. Okay, you're launched. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my mic and my camera. But if you need anything, holler, I'm right here. And otherwise, I'll pop back in as you're ending up the webinar.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, Tamara, it is just such an honor to be here. As you mentioned, we have just such a long history, you know, at A New Beginning and the Healthy Way Out, working with Center for Change. Just really through the decades, we've referred to you guys readily because your treatment hearts and ours are so closely aligned. And so that really makes this webinar even that much more meaningful. So today we're going to really take you into the comprehensive work that we have been doing in the area of working with people who are struggling with binge eating disorder and chronic struggles with weight. Especially over the past 8 years, Dr. Ashley and I have just really been enthralled by what's become a really hopeful process, a process that's been really similar to one that we took many, many years ago with anorexia and bulimia. You know, we have found over and over and over again that when you work on the underlying deeper issues, full and lasting recovery occurs. You know, years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was a brand new psychologist, it was about 30 years ago, A New Beginning was one of the first treatment centers that we're aware of that actually risked to put up on our website, full recovery from eating disorders is possible. We are thrilled now that there's robust research that shows that for both anorexia and bulimia. And it has been our experience with our clients with binge eating disorder that it is the same case. When you work on the underlying issues, it opens the door to true and lasting behavioral change. And that's what we would like to share with you today.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So let's take you on this journey that Dr. Julie and I have been on for the last several years. But before we do that, we have to set the stage and we have to talk about the context in which this journey has been had. And unfortunately, as I think all of us on this webinar today are aware of, we are really living in a nation, maybe even a world, right, that is completely obsessed with what's called the obesity epidemic. And we intentionally put that into quotes to acknowledge that this is the term that has been coined, certainly not a term that we enjoy using, but one that is used widely, and it really does speak to the damaging nature of this very narrow focus on what is deemed the problem, right? So we're living in a country that really looks at weight as this determinant of health and looks at weight gain or higher weight as the problem, and then therefore assumes that weight loss is the solution. And as a result of this, then, you know, constantly diet and exercise get touted as the gold standard for health, right? And a side effect or a fallout of that is just ongoing and increasing weight stigma and bias that our clients unfortunately experience over and over and over again. I'm sure many of yours do as well. And all of this is done with little to no regard for what is going on underneath the surface of the eating behavior, maybe the challenges with weight. Nobody's really talking in great detail about the emotional and psychological components. So even though our country continues to believe that diets are the solution, we all know that diets are very much the problem, right? Diets are actually the thing that are leading people more and more and more into disorder. And we have an abundance of research to back this up, right? Not we as researchers, but we as a field, we as a collective field know that dieting leads to more disorder. And there's several statistics on here. This is just a very small slice of the research that supports this idea that the more a person diets, the more likely they are to struggle with disordered eating, the more likely they are to struggle with weight issues related to their disordered eating. And it just becomes a vicious cycle. So as eating disorder clinicians who are so committed to helping our clients not only get to full recovery, but get to full recovery in a really emotionally and psychologically healthy way, we know that to treat binge eating disorder, it has to be a no diet approach. And this is really where our story begins.
Yes.
Right?
So I tried to go through these next two slides in a way that was somewhat concise, and it's so hard because there's so many important pieces to this 8-year journey. I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible, but this is really close to our heart. So Dr. Ashley just got done talking about how much over and over and over again we are struck by dieting as something that is almost criminal in our country. And so when more and more clients were coming in, you know, we were actually really happy once binge eating disorder started, becoming more prevalent as a term. It became more mainstream. People were starting to be more aware of this as a true psychological disorder. This still is pre-DSM-5, pre-2013. But there was still this divide that was happening in our country, and I think it also represented the world. And that was that we looked at addressing issues of maladaptive relationship with food, really from two different, very divided camps. On the psychological and the psychiatric front, we tended to look solely at treating the binge eating disorder. We saw this accurately as a psychological disorder, but there was very little attention given to the body self, right? It was almost like we really couldn't address that, even though most of our clients came in leading with that as their top presenting concern. On the other hand, there was the medical world, and the medical world looked at obesity. Again, that's a medical term. We don't tend to use that term. AMA, interesting, in 2013 actually coined that term as a medical disease state that coincided, interestingly, with the DSM-5. But the medical community looked at issues of maladaptive relationship with food solely from the behavioral. Let's prescribe a diet, and then let's tell people to exercise. And there was little or no awareness and certainly no understanding for the psychological issues, the underlying binge eating disorder, even though at least 30% of people that seek weight loss treatment and show up in their doctor's office complaining about their weight have an underlying binge eating disorder, but it simply was not addressed. We saw that as a problem. We thought the DSM-5 would rectify that. Unfortunately, it didn't. The other thing that was happening was the obesity epidemic. We were really disheartened by this. I had a horrible incident with my youngest daughter, which I don't have time to go into today, but she was introduced at school by this really unhealthy concept that was all under the guise of being helpful for the obesity epidemic. And I knew as an eating disorder specialist that it actually was facilitative of creating a really negative diet mentality. So we really wanted people to know that there is an emotional component when we're looking at this obesity epidemic, that this is not just about diet and exercise. We wanted to introduce the emotional piece, and we really took it on as our platform around the year 2013, 2014.
As our passion.
As our passion, absolutely. We don't have any passion for this area. So I reached out to Dr. Ashley. She had been on my team for many years. I saw her clinical acumen, her definite heart, her passion, and I just really care about her very deeply. And I said, let's do something about this.
And I said, yes.
So we risked once again, and it felt like a risk, very much like years ago when we put up on the website, full recovery from anorexia and bulimia is possible. And we said, let's develop a comprehensive program that acknowledges the emotional component, that also addresses the nutritional and the physical component, but does it in a healthy way, a way that does not have dieting as its cornerstone, certainly no diet trauma, which we're going to be talking about, but that is comprehensive. And we did risk to use the word way in our title, The Healthy Way Out. We were concerned certainly that people would misunderstand us, but we felt like it was important because it really spoke to what our clients were wanting, at least at the beginning of them coming in for treatment. They learned very readily it wasn't about weight, it was about many other things, but they thought initially that's what it was about.
Right, exactly.
So the journey continued, and Dr. Ashton and I just developed a really deep and active relationship with our Healthy Way Out community. We did assessment, and we literally sat across from hundreds of people that were sharing with us very detailed backstories. We like to say every body has a story, and over and over again we were hearing what were the etiological factors that were starting to create the profile of the emotional eater. So Dr. Ashley and I, in developing a really wonderful friendship and a continued passion, practice very much what we preach. So every year when we work on programming, we take ourselves to a really soulful place. And in 2016, that soulful place was Maui. We sat, maybe not with one or two glasses of wine in our hands, and we started talking about these clients that came in and shared their stories. And we started talking about the history and the abuse about the disruption to self, about the disruption to body that was uncannily familiar. And I would say one characteristic, and Dr. Ashley would say another characteristic. And before we knew it, we looked at each other and we said, we have to write this down.
Yeah.
And it became 7 characteristics, what we call the psychological profile, that is inside the mind of an emotional eater. Okay. As we went into that work, we started really speaking internationally. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet with kind of a counterpart in Australia. His name is Dr. Glenn McIntosh. He definitely has the same kind of heart that we have for treatment. In asking to do a podcast with him, we talked about in that podcast the underlying dynamics that give rise to this disordered relationship with food, body, and self. We talked about full recovery as possible, and the outpouring of people responding to that podcast was incredible.
Yeah.
People were saying, this sounds like me. I didn't know there was a reason. I thought I was just broken.
Never heard this before.
Never heard this before, and I certainly never thought that I could even hope for full recovery. So they, of course, asked, where can we get this treatment? Unfortunately,
how can we work with you?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we can't do that because of limitations of licensure. So in our innovative way, we found a way to create an educational and inspirational platform where we're able to give this information out literally across the world. We have created, it's called the Circle of Hope, and we have people from Greece and from Peru and from
Australia
and England and Canada that receives this education on a weekly basis, not just from us, but from our dietitians also. So that's become our deeper work. And then ultimately, we took it a little bit further. We'll talk to you about that in a bit. And we are starting to develop our framework to put, again, all of this together in what we are calling the emotion-focused weight care that we will be developing. We actually are developing it. We're in the middle of writing a book. So that got way longer than I expected, and I really tried to make that abbreviated. But that's the journey that brought these 2 clinicians to this place, right? So a lot of history, a lot of listening to clients, a lot of searching our hearts, looking at the research, seeing what works, and then working on those deeper issues to get people to full and lasting recovery.
That's right. So what we're going to do today, we're so excited about, thank you for that really wonderful introduction. We're going to take you on this journey with us, and we're going to take you inside the mind of an emotional eater, which is really, kind of speaking to what is going on, right? What has kind of created the psyche's need for food as a coping mechanism. And then we're going to go into the deeper work, which is more of the how. So I understand what's going on now. How the heck do I fix this, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So let's start with inside the mind of an emotional eater, which, as you said, is this psychological profile of people affected by binge eating disorder, chronic overeating, and it really just spilled out of us as a result of sitting across from every single person that was coming through our program. You and I were able to be with them and hear their stories. And so these 7 components really set the stage for understanding why, in spite of maybe these other goals of wanting to stop eating or wanting to do this or that, why the psyche continues to hold on to this eating behavior. So let's look at profile number 1. Okay, and we're going to start with these early childhood years. As we know from a developmental perspective, those formative years, they do lay the foundation for our psychology later on. So the first profile is significant and ongoing stress or trauma in early childhood. Time and time again, our clients are saying their story to us, and there is significant stress. Sometimes, oftentimes trauma, which leads into some PTSD, but definitely very stressful events. We have some examples here that unfortunately we hear all too often, physical and sexual abuse. In fact, sexual abuse is rampant in the population that we are working with. We don't have specific numbers, but it's definitely not 100%, but it's definitely not far off from that number either, which is startling and makes a lot of sense when you think about what later happens with their body, right? We see neglect, either emotional and psychological neglect. The parents are not emotionally available or there. Also physical neglect. So many stories of parents needing to be out of the home, maybe to pay the bills, but really leaving unmet needs behind in the child. We also hear of, wealth, where the parents are off traveling, left with the nannies, left home alone, left with older siblings. Again, developmental needs not being met, family violence, addiction, just ongoing stressors that create chaos and create fear in this child's developing psyche. We start to see the beginning of a very activated nervous system. We see chronic fight or flight, a lot of fear, and these children grow up to become adults with very activated nervous systems. Stress becomes the familiar zone, okay? And really kind of always feeling activated and looking for something to try to calm their nervous system down, right?
Exactly. The second phenomenon that we see in the profile of the emotional eater is minimization of childhood dysfunction by key attachment figures. Think about all the things that Dr. Ashley just talked about. It's Friday morning and dad is passed out on the sofa after a night of excessive drinking that segued into heinous domestic violence. Despite the fact that mom was verbally abused and physically abused well into the night, you wake up and mom is at the kitchen stove making breakfast as if nothing has happened. Her clients say, I risked to ask mom, are you okay? And mom looks at her with this quizzical look and says, of course I'm okay. I don't know what you're talking about. Now you better hurry up and get ready for school. Because you were so activated, so scared, you say, Mom, I get really scared when dad goes into his excessive drinking, when he rages. It makes me really frightened. And then mom looks at you and says, your dad's a good man. You know that dress we bought for you on Saturday night that you're gonna wear to the prom? Guess what? Your dad's hard work bought that dress. Everybody has their stress, you're told, okay? What is wrong with you? Are you ungrateful? And that child walks away filled with shame, thinking, there's something wrong with me.
You got it.
I'm just ingrateful. That child learns to no longer trust their own perceptions. They are having accurate feelings in response to dysfunctional and chaotic external events. But those perceptions are being discounted and minimized and invalidated. They are being gaslit. They're told, what's wrong with you that you are having this experience, because nothing is amiss. You must just be too crazy or too sensitive, or you're being dramatic, or, you know, you fill in the blank. You hear this from your clients. Unfortunately, what happens is that child then becomes an adult. And what do we do with these early processes? We internalize them, and we become an adult that gaslights ourselves, right? So when we're having normal feelings, we dismiss them. We say, what is wrong with me?
I'm too sensitive.
I'm too sensitive, okay? We don't pay attention to them. And even though we feel like we are filled with shame, we have overwhelming emotions going on, we have developed no capacity to self-regulate or to respond to our emotions, our emotional processes, or ourself in a healthy way.
Right.
Okay? We all need comfort. We all need self-regulation. Guess what? We end up turning to food.
That's right. All right, well, to add fuel to the fire, the third component of this profile is a limited tolerance for emotional and environmental stimulation. Now, there's kind of two components that we want to emphasize here. One is there's an incredible amount of stress going on for this child, and nobody to help them organize it, make sense out of it, heal it, soothe it. But another thing that we noticed, again, as we sat across from each and every client, that we weren't expecting, but that really developed was this profile as a highly sensitive person. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this term, this is not our term. This was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron. And if you go to her website, hsperson.com, you can read about it. She has a little quiz to see if you're a highly sensitive. You and I are both.
Definitely.
Most clinicians, I think, are. And the word sensitive is used in a really beautiful, supportive way. It really speaks to the richness and depth that this person experiences their world, both their outer world, the things going on around them, but also their inner world, you know, their thoughts, their feelings, their dreams, their goals. So you take this child who's in a very stressful environment, not getting the guidance and support, and you couple that then with a temperament. Okay, this is considered a temperament trait.
It's a neurological condition.
You're born with it. It's seen in about 20% of the general population. You pair all of this with this highly sensitive trait. Now you have this child who is feeling a richness and a depth inside, coupled with a reaction to the stress and nobody helping them organize it. So their nervous system just can't hold all of this. So their tolerance for this stimulation becomes very, very limited, okay? And what we mean by stimulation from the highly sensitive person perspective is you're deeply moved. You're deeply stimulated, again, by the things outside of you and inside of you. So this could be very, very moved by a song that you hear, moved to tears. It could also be deeply disturbed by the news or a violent movie. It could be being moved to tears by your own emotional internal world or by the dreams that you conjure up inside. So it's a richness and a depth to what goes on inside. And we see this time and time and time again. Not 100%, but again, very close to with the population that we work with. They very much identify with this trait.
Absolutely. Okay. Another trait that we see, this is going to be profile number 4, and this is close to 100% as well. And I think you're going to agree with that. I'm sure you see this in your clients all the time. And that's having been put on a diet as a child, and oftentimes from a very young age. Think about the stories you hear about the ritualistic Saturday morning Weight Watchers meeting with mom, right? Where as a child of 8 years old, you're being publicly weighed on a weekly basis. Think about the stories that you hear about, you know, back to school shopping sprees that are promised at the beginning of the summer if you just lose those 10 pounds, right, before the next year, right? You also hear stories about the special food that they had to eat, right, when their siblings are able to eat, you know, whatever the rest of the family is eating, the pizza or the hamburgers, but they are eating the chicken breast or the steamed broccoli, right? Because they're told that they are different, that they're kind of a girl or they're a stocky boy. Right? So when this happens repeatedly and from a very early age, this actually becomes your emotional template for your body self. Okay? It is almost synonymous that your body is equal to the number, okay, that it is, or the clothing size that you wore. Clients can recall kind of what size they were when they were 7 or 8 or 13 years old. And it becomes a template, just like our emotional processes become a template. So when they show up in your office and or they go on Instagram, very well intended, saying, I want to follow body positive influencers, and they hear from well intended therapists, you know, we just want you to celebrate your body and have a positive experience of your body. While that's true, it's really unsettling. It's almost disorienting because it's never yet been an experience of their body self.
Right.
All right. They actually were raised in a family culture where their bodies were noticed. Their bodies were evaluated for its size. Their parents were typically also on a diet. So for these individuals, size really did matter. So we need to similarly rework this from the inside out
Right.
before we can hope that our clients can embrace in a really loving and authentic way, right? The true wonderful entity that their body is for all the reasons other than their body shape or size.
Exactly. And to take that a step further, then the messaging that starts to kick in is your weight is tied to your worth. Okay,
Yeah.
so you take this developing child who's in a very stressful environment, traumatic environment perhaps, nobody guiding them through the emotions. They have this highly sensitive trait. They're put on a diet. They now know their body's being watched. They know that this matters.
Yeah.
You start to create a psychology that says, God, what is wrong with me? Who I am as a person is broken. We have clients come in as adults who absolutely hate themselves. You know, when they talk about themselves and they say, I'm disgusting.
I'm broken.
I'm broken. And they're not just talking about their bodies, they are talking about their whole internal being. Okay, so deeply ashamed of who they are, feeling so bad about themselves, and incredibly critical. And just never feeling good enough. And what we find, to bring this back to binge eating, is a deep psychological emptiness, a hollowness inside of them that then they turn to food to try to fill up, right? But as we know, that never works.
Yeah. Okay, so the next profile that we see all the time is an intense fear of emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy. And by now you're probably saying, well, gosh, of course.
Right.
But when our clients show up in our office, they say, I want an intimate relationship. And darn it, what's stopping me is the shame that I have, the issues with my self-esteem because I am overweight.
Right.
Okay. They have the causal relationship backwards, and therefore they feel like if I just lose the weight, I'm going to be able to have the emotional and physical and sexual intimacy I want. And all too often we know what happens is that people then can and do lose the weight all sorts of different ways, and they're not able to tolerate that intimacy. So what we really want to be able to work on is the relational trauma that these wonderful, kind, sensitive, tender-hearted individuals experience throughout their life, really a component of complex trauma. Because really their experience was that it was never safe to be in a close, emotionally intimate relationship with other. Okay, so when this happens, they become an adult that, guess what, of course you're going to guard against any kind of real intimacy with other people. You might be in a relationship, but you're going to guard that tender self because I don't want to be wounded again. All right, so we find that their relationships tend to be superficial. They isolate both socially and emotionally. They tend to physically retreat. However, they still have those needs, right? We all have those attachment needs. We want to be nurtured. We want to be comforted. We want to feel close. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is food becomes that relational object. Okay, food becomes the best friend, the confidant, it becomes your lover, right? So we have to work on the underlying attachment and relational trauma that has gone on to make it safe ultimately to be close and intimate with others, for them to ultimately give up their primary relationship of choice, which at this time is food.
Exactly.
Yep.
And lastly, we get to the pinnacle of this profile of inside the mind of an emotional eater, which is a needless self. Okay, if you put stress and no attachment figures guiding you through it, and the highly sensitive trait, and your worth is in your weight, and people are terrifying, you arrive into adulthood, what I call a shell of a human. Right? A beautiful human, but really disconnected from most, if not all, of your internal world. And what happens then is your focus is not on within, but outside of you. Okay, so the focus becomes them. The focus becomes their needs, their feelings, what's happening around you, trying to control it, keep the stress and the chaos down, don't rock the boat, keep everyone happy. And as I'm sure you can hear in what I'm saying, we now have the foundation for people pleasing, excessive caretaking, codependency, a focus on others because it's too painful, it's too scary, it's too disorienting to focus within on the self. Right?
Yep. Okay. So now you're saying, Dr. Julie, you started out saying that this was a hopeful process, and this sure as heck sounds anything but hopeful, okay? But we promise you it is, because this is the thing. When you understand, you become aware of the true underlying etiological issues, guess what? You can step in and you can work on treating this so that ultimately we can have lasting behavioral change. This is really what the deeper work for full recovery is all about. It's about how do we help people to rework, actually to rewire their capacity to respond to their emotions, their emotional processes, their self and others, in a way that is healthy and truly need fulfilling, so that food does not become their primary and necessary survival default mechanism. Okay. So in the deeper work, we help our clients connect the dots. We have delineated 7 components, what we kind of called 7 layers. That must have been on one of our retreats, but the 7 layers of the deeper work. And these are what we feel are the key components that really help to rework, to rewire these early complex trauma experiences so that you don't need this dysfunctional relationship with food.
That's true. All right, so let's go into the deeper work, layer number 1. You know, people come to us and come to our program because we offer a no diet approach. And somewhere deep inside of them, they know that this is what they need. They're sick of diets. But in coming to us and getting something different, they are kind of faced with within themselves, confronted within themselves, the diet trauma and the debris, the diet debris that surrounds them after years, usually decades, for our clients of dieting, and having handed over their time, their energy, their money, and their hope that a diet would solve their problems. And so in working with us, one of the foundational pieces that we begin with is helping them move through this diet trauma, you know, starting from childhood, as it is true for most of our clients, into where they are in the here and now, helping them to grieve all that has been lost to diets. Like you said, it's criminal.
Yeah, and sometimes get super angry as well.
Exactly, they get very angry. And you know, what we hear so often is, why has nobody told me this before? Why am I 58 years old just now hearing this? And that anger is appropriate.
Right, exactly.
And so part of our beginning work is holding a space for that anger to come out, because that is healthy, appropriate anger. And this is the beginning of shedding that dieting mentality, getting angry at it, feeling the injustice of diet culture, and starting to embrace a very core component of our work, which is the intuitive eating principles, and helping them start to really shift into wanting to do something very differently. So diet trauma no more is layer number 1.
Yay, we love it. We love it. Okay, so the layer number 2 goes to something that I've just alluded to, and that is the absolute need to rework and to rewire a healthy attachment process, right? Clients say, Dr. Julie, you know, I understand now what happened to me, but nothing's going to change that, right? Am I destined to fight this for the rest of my life? And I say, absolutely not. And the reason why is because we actually have the opportunity to rewire vis-a-vis our intrapersonal relationship with ourself. Yes, we can rework by becoming a healthy attachment figure to ourself,
Yeah.
right?
That loving mama.
That loving mama. So what I say is, you know what? The psyche really works in our favor because the psyche has no sense of time. It doesn't know the past, the present, or the future. That's why sometimes these things from the past hurt so much. They feel so present in the here and now. But we're going to use that to our advantage because yourself needs a healthy attachment experience. But it doesn't matter if you get it the first time around or if you get it vis-a-vis redoing it within the relationship with yourself. All right. So what we learn or work on doing is helping a client to develop an internal template that responds to their emotions, their emotional processes, their self, and then others in a way that is healthy. We don't want them to just acknowledge the negative of what's happened in the past. We don't want them to only heal their past feelings of abuse or neglect, although that's important. We really want them to develop a current, healthy relationship in the here and now, and we can do that within themselves. Okay, so what that is going to look like is we want them to be attuned to themselves, right? Isn't that what mindfulness is all about? Isn't that about getting them to reconnect to their bodies and reconnect to themselves? When they do, and they are aware of what their feelings are, what their needs are, what their emotions are telling them, they need to learn to validate, okay? And to support, not to reject those feelings. We need to work on reversing the internalization of that gaslighting so that they can ultimately self-regulate and self-soothe. They can respond to themselves in a self-compassionate, loving way that uses curiosity for the self as opposed to self-judgment, self-criticism, and self-rejection, which only has led them back to food.
Yeah, and we teach them that all of their emotions and behaviors make sense.
Yeah.
We may not understand it right here, right now, but if we stay compassionate and curious,
Yep.
that will come forward and it will make sense.
Absolutely.
Which is very, very important.
Yep.
All right, layer number 3. This is one of our favorites.
Yeah,
Well,
they're all of our favorites.
We say this every single one, but
We were like fighting. Who gets to do which layer? Because they're all our favorites.
This one's so good. No, this one's so good. But learning to love your vulnerability. Okay, so
I love this one.
yeah, so you start to get compassionate and curious about your inner world and what's going on, and that's all well and good, but now we're going to take it a step further, and we really want to help our clients connect with their tenderness, their vulnerability inside, and embrace it, right? So take that curiosity, take that compassion, and now let's turn that into a full embracing of your tender parts inside. So this will include really embracing and celebrating your needs, your wounds, you know, the things that that just feel really tender and sensitive to you, your feelings, your emotional responses to things when your feelings maybe get hurt. And rather than rejecting that and having kind of a harsh response to that, you really appreciate those tender parts of you. You start to celebrate your sensitivity. You start to say like, yeah, I'm an HSP, that's a badge of honor. And you risk to get to know all parts of yourself long before you share those with anybody, right? You start to share them within. You start to even give yourself permission to notice what's going on inside, to love it, to appreciate its function, and to work within that. And I know for a fact, and I know you do too, that the therapeutic relationship is such a beautiful space for that to begin, where another person can witness those beautiful, tender, vulnerable parts, and it's okay and it's safe to get to know those parts. This is one of the cornerstones of the most beautiful healing process that we have the privilege of watching with our clients. And the day that they start to celebrate their sensitivity and vulnerability is the day that we celebrate right alongside them, right?
Absolutely. Mostly with a lot of tears in our eyes.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so the next is healing your dysfunctional past, the gift of reparenting. And, you know, we certainly do a lot of work, you know, healing anything that's unresolved from the past, helping them to connect up to those emotions, help them through lots of different expressive means to be able to cathartic, to release, you know, to really reconcile with the fact of what has happened. But what feels really, really imperative is then to start looking at, again, what is your intrapersonal relationship with self? Because if you work to heal from the past, but you are continuing to criticize and abuse and reject yourself in the here and now, guess what? Your psyche thinks, hey, we're still stuck in childhood and we still desperately need to hide and we need food to be able to cope. So we do lots of things that I've talked about and Dr. Ashley has earlier regarding connecting and responding, but I want to emphasize on this slide that we really have to look at what are the obstacles to stepping in and to becoming kinder to yourself. What are those blocking beliefs? What are those narratives, oftentimes related to shame, that are still there? And we do a lot of work through imagery and, again, expressive work to really connect yourself to that tender part or parts of yourself inside so that you can have true compassion, authentic empathy, and really then start being that attachment figure to yourself in the here and now. All right. When this happens, you get, you know, a sense of self that is seen, that is heard, that is celebrated, that is cherished, that is truly, truly loved. And that then results in true core foundational self-worth. Okay. And when we have self-worth, we can have emotional intimacy with ourselves. We're no longer afraid to connect. We're not afraid to go inside and see what's going to be there, right? Because we feel worthy. We also are not afraid to let other people see who we truly are, because again, that shame has dissipated and it has been replaced. It has been recreated. Our foundation is recreated with a true, healthy sense of self-worth, self-esteem, true love for yourself, that you can embrace all parts of yourself, including your body self.
And when you have self-worth, you have everything.
I'm not going to disagree with that. Yeah.
So that folds nicely then into layer number 5.
Into layer number 5, and I fought for this one. that is living from your real self. You know, we want all of our clients to learn how to stop misusing food, and we want them to survive their histories that they have lived through. But most importantly, we really want all of our clients to be able to come home back to their real self. When I was a graduate student and I was introduced to James Masterson's term, the real self, I remember just getting chills, and I still get chills, because it really is about coming back to who we were meant to be before dysfunction happened, before disruption happened, before lack of attunement, before shame occurred. And when we live from our true self, we feel loved and accepted and validated, right? We engage with a self that is filled with joy. It feels alive, you know, it just feels authentic. And when you live from that place, there's no room for a dysfunctional relationship with food, because there's no room for a dysfunctional relationship with self.
And there's no need for food as a coping strategy.
Right, exactly. People can enjoy food. You can certainly partake in food, but food is not utilized, you know, as the only means to cope with a self that is filled with shame, because you are living from your real self. You are loving yourself. You are supporting yourself. You're being that healthy adult to yourself that we all wish we were gifted to be able to have been given in life.
Yeah. So when you start to live from your real self, guess what? You go into layer number 6, you take that into living with emotional intimacy with others, okay? Your relationships transform. We watch this over and over with our clients. They transform from superficial, they transform from one-sided or codependent or people-pleasing into something that is so rich and deep. Right? You bring your real self to the table and you need the other person. You want the other person and you invite the other person to bring their real self to the table, right? So there's space for everyone to be authentic. There's a desire for everyone to be authentic. The relationship can go so much deeper in truth Sometimes those truths might be hard, the conversations might be hard, the feelings might be hard to feel, but because you're so anchored in yourself, and because the other person hopefully is so anchored in their real self, you trust that you can get through it some way, somehow, and you trust that in a healthy relationship, this is actually going to deepen the connection and the vulnerability and the intimacy. So I love watching my clients transform in their relationships, where they go from tolerating superficial one-sided relationships to expecting emotionally intimate, deep relationships, and they won't stand for anything less than that. And if they do, that's so, if the relationships can't go deeper, then they just kind of know that they might interact with them a little differently. Maybe there will be a little more distance, and then really put energy into those relationships that can have depth.
Yeah, beautiful, really beautiful. Okay, so the last layer is, I think, both of our favorites.
Yes.
Even though we say all of them are.
Again, the pinnacle.
But this is feeding your soul. And we really do believe that when your soul is truly fed, there is no room for a dysfunctional relationship with food, whether that is underfeeding or overfeeding, because your soul is being fed. So this to me is, how you hope to direct yourself if you were given all of those early gifts in life. So you're seeing yourself, you're loving yourself, you're caring enough about yourself to support yourself. So you are no longer, giving your life away to other people in a codependent way. So you're steering yourself through your own life. Let's say you want to go back to school and you want to become a counselor. You are going to listen to that, and you are going to support your ability to kind of feed that part of your soul that wants to do what you always wanted to do in life, right? You're going to give yourself the opportunity to engage in activities that make you feel good. That might be traveling, that might be art, that might be dancing when nobody is watching.
Or when they are.
Or when they are. It is just allowing yourself to listen, and without hesitation, feeding that soul, letting that spirit come alive. Now, the people we're talking about. Those are the people that are walking around in Target and they are just happy, and you're wondering what the heck is happening to them. They're just kind of like glowing. And these are the people that over and over and over again are connected to themselves. They're listening to themselves. They are stepping in and working hard to support themselves, whatever that might be, right? And therefore they are living a fulfilled life. Fulfilled being spelled F-U-L-L, filled life, and there's no room or need for disorder. That's our hope for every single client that we work with in our program.
So let's take a deep breath, right? So we take our wonderful clients through Inside the Mind. They understand what's going on. We take our wonderful clients through the deeper work.
Which is sometimes a hard process.
Sometimes a hard process, but worth it.
Yeah.
And gosh darn it, after all that wonderful work, Dr. Julie.
They look at us and they
ask,
what about the weight?
Yeah.
They literally, and this is from story after story, say, I am so much happier with myself. Guess what? I'm no longer depressed. I'm not binge eating.
Right.
But Dr. Julie, I am 42 years old and I can't run around with my kids that are under the age of 6, not the way that I want to, all right? And it's really important to listen to the word I, because this is not coming from me. It's not coming from Dr. Ashley. And in our opinion, it shouldn't come from any provider sitting across from a client, right? Our model is always an empowerment model. It's what is important to you, and we want it to come from a healthy place, right? So it's really important that we help people to shift out of that place of self-hate, right, and self-judgment, and into a place of self-love. And this actually was what a client said to me. They said, Dr. Julie, you taught me how to love myself. And I'm going to tell you that I love myself so much, I don't want to have diabetes anymore. Okay. I love myself so much that I want to go and do this adventure with my child, and I can't do it with where I'm at physically.
Yeah. I remember the day that a client of mine looked me in the eyes. We've been doing the deeper work. She loves herself. She has reconnected with a real zest for life. And because of the deeper work, she looks at me and she says, Dr. Ashley, I want to go live my best life. And what's on my bucket list is I want to skydive. And I've got a big generational birthday coming up, and I really want to celebrate skydiving. That would mean the world to me. But there's a weight limitation to that activity. And, you know, I would like to change my weight a little bit so that I can go live my best life and do this activity that I never knew I would want to do. But because of the healing work, I want to do it.
Yeah. So what this did in a way that is characteristic through our process is it really stopped us in our tracks and made us think a lot. We took ourselves on yet another retreat and we said, okay, like, what are we going to do about this? Because typically what would happen, and I think you probably all can relate to this too, if we don't address this in a healthy way with our clients, they end up going to the doctor or they end up going to the trainer and they get put on the HCG diet or I don't know, look at bariatric surgery. And I'm not judging any of these things. Again, that's not my place to judge. It is my place really to respond and to do it according to what our beliefs are. And so we really started searching for a way that we could, you know, help people with this underlying deeper work. And then also, you know, introduce a way that then they can also approach their body self in a manner that does not involve dieting and that does not have any of the trauma that we know that they've experienced in the past.
Right. So think intuitive eating.
Yeah. Think intuitive movement.
And think every body has a story, right? So this is the new framework that we are developing, emotion-focused weight care. And it's really a self-loving and compassionate approach to helping people forge a relationship with their body self and their weight. That is not only a no diet approach, but what we call a no trauma approach, right? This is fueled by love. This is fueled by respect, not only for themselves and their body, but for the life that they want to live for themselves. And we feel an obligation as compassionate providers to be responsive to what they are wanting and do it in a really psychologically and emotionally responsible way. So we're excited to be bringing this into the fold.
What we're doing is we are wanting to provide an alternative for people that are requesting this. You know, when I give my lecture at Mayo Clinic working with the medical students, and by the end of the lecture, thankfully, they are like, oh my gosh, I am not going to prescribe another diet. And they say, Dr. Julie, what am I supposed to do? Right? Because they want to be able to help their patients, and we want to help our clients to take care of themselves, their whole self, including their body self, in a way, again, that is self-loving and self-supportive, that does not have any dieting, that has all of the healthy components that help them to love themselves from the inside out. And mostly we wanted to give them an alternative, because I don't want to hear from another client that they then went to a medical doctor or, you know, are thinking about all sorts of other things that I know are just going to trigger them back to their binge eating disorder.
That's right. So guys, this is the healthy way out of emotional and binge eating. You have to understand the psychological function of the relationship with food, the psyche's need for food, right? Then you start to shift that need by cultivating some healthy emotional and psychological processes so that food is no longer the go-to to get those needs met, but that they can do that within themselves in a really beautiful way. And then and again, this is an if, sometimes we have clients go through the deeper work and they're like, hey, you know, I am perfectly fine with where my body self is at, and we celebrate that. And it's delightful.
And that happens quite a bit, and that is just, we rejoice. That is beautiful.
It's wonderful. And for those clients who still want to have some changes in their weight, we then want to offer them an approach that's no diet, no trauma. So inside the mind of an emotional eater, the deeper work for full recovery and emotion-focused weight care, put it all together, and people can have lasting change for a lifetime from binge eating disorder. Right?
Absolutely. Okay. So we hope that you have enjoyed this journey inside the mind of an emotional eater, and that you have learned, hopefully, some of the pieces for the deeper work for full recovery. Dr. Ashley and I want to let you know that we are working on having programming with all of these themes, doing some really deep dives. We are starting to now offer them to people outside of our Circle of Hope subscription community. We actually have our first release of our first bundled program, and that was a series that we ran that was the deeper work to help support intuitive eating processes.
Yeah. So if you have any clients who are working on intuitive eating, we know that this is just an incredible no diet approach to your relationship with food. But we also know that it can be really, really challenging for people as they're trying to navigate these emotional and psychological components that underlie their relationship with food. So this video series takes each principle. There's one video per principle, and we go into the deeper work components of what makes this principle challenging and what are some of the deeper work processes that might need to be looked at and evolved so that intuitive eating is not only possible but really satisfying. So we find this video series helpful not only for clients but also for practitioners who are wanting maybe a deeper understanding of the psychological components of intuitive eating. So you can go to thehealthywayout.com. It's right there on the homepage. You can learn more about it, or you can email us too at contact@thehealthywayout.com. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So,
well, we hope today has been helpful. We hope that you actually have the hope that we have with working with this population, and that it will help you as you walk through your journey with your clients. And
we thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Julie, Dr. Ashley. That was fascinating and so hopeful. It was really lovely. So thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that we're going to try and get to. I know we're right at the top of the hour. There are folks that need to head to meetings and that kind of thing. So I want to just do a couple of quick reminders, and then we'll get to a couple of questions. The first reminder is that when I end this webinar here in a few minutes, then an evaluation will pop up. If you would take just a minute to complete the evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for Center for Change. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to be candid in your feedback, and then we tabulate that information and send it to the CE entities. And then about an hour from now, you will get a separate email from GoToWebinar with a link to take the online post test. You must take the test online in order to receive continuing education credit. And when you pass it online, your CE certificate will download to your computer automatically. So if you don't see it on your screen, look for it in your downloads file. Okay, a couple of quick questions. The first one's easy, from Maria. She said, what's the website for the quiz to identify the emotional self? You referenced it at the beginning of the presentation, and if you would mention that again, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So for the highly sensitive person, I believe is maybe what you're asking. So that website is www.hs, as in Sam, person.com. So like highly sensitive person.
And there's wonderful books, both for adults and for children, that are just incredible reads.
Wonderful. Okay. This is a question from Jean. How does having a food plan fit into your quote no diet?
That's a great question.
I thought it was a good one.
Actually. Yeah, so we talk quite a bit about flexible structure when it comes to meal planning. And I know in my experience and in our center's experience in working with this population, you know, at the outset, some structure is really helpful. I think decades of dieting creates a lot of chaos and uncertainty and misinformation, of course, about what's going on nutritionally, what does the body actually need from a general nutrition perspective. So we find that our dietitians have more success when they do create some structure at the beginning, which may be in the form of a meal plan, and we have to walk that carefully because that can trigger the diet history as
Yeah,
well.
and I'll add a piece as you're wrapping up.
Yeah, so creating that structure, but also keeping flexibility in the plan and continuing to add more and more flexibility as the client develops more trust within themselves and within their body to respond to the natural cues that are there. So flexible structure to kind of bridge that divide from, chronic dieting and maybe not having the body cues quite yet, to being able to eat intuitively and trust the body.
Yeah, intuitive eating is always, we emphasize that is the end goal, and it is a long process to be able to get there, and it's a very individualized process. So certainly we might do the structured meal planning for some individuals, but we're going to look individually really at where everybody is at. Some people are not able to tend to their bodily cues because they're just not able to connect to that at this point. Sometimes the metabolism has slowed down and changed, so we have to get that regulated. So we really do emphasize that there's lots and lots of steps that are very individualized, but our end goal is always to get somebody to an intuitive eating approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. There were a couple of questions that were similar to this one that Vanessa sent to us. How do you help someone with BED but does not identify any past traumas and or struggles to identify emotions? And the other thing I'd add to that is there were a couple of questions similar to that, but saying I know of folks who have an eating disorder, but in my own family, and there is no family trauma, and we don't blame families for that. And how do you balance those things?
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, so I think that first and foremost, it is so important that when we talk about going back into the histories, it is never with the intention or the goal to blame. It is to understand, right? What are the pieces that created your current deficiencies? It's like putting together like a 20,000 piece puzzle, and it's never to blame. I mean, my goodness, I'm a mother, Dr. Ashley is a mother, and we are for the most part, all doing the best that we can and doing it quite imperfectly.
Yes.
All right. The other thing that happens is trauma tends to hold with it, the connotation of this big event. And certainly the examples that we gave today, are going to be more on that extreme. We want to really kind of emphasize these things. But a lot of times there's small t trauma. There can also be areas of misattunement. Like if someone is a highly sensitive, and let's say they have a parent that is maybe on the spectrum of Asperger's, and there is just not a connection, that can also disrupt your ability to learn how to self-regulate, to normalize your own emotional processes and emotional states. So a lot of times our clients do come in with that kind of framework, and certainly we're not looking for trauma, we're just looking for what created this current deficiency. And oftentimes through that process, they're like, wow, I didn't even know when my brother, who was behaviorally acting out, and I had this highly sensitive temperament, that was disruptive. My parents were, of course, very focused on him, and I felt like I didn't really get my needs met, which affected my self-worth and self-esteem.
Sure.
Okay, so think these kinds of scenarios too.
Yeah, and what I will say to that, this is a great question, and we get this a lot. Clients come in and they're like, I had a great childhood, there's nothing that stands out that really accounts for why I struggle with this. And so we just work to meet them where they're at. And so we can start with, let's bring your awareness to what happens in the here and now when your mind starts to go to food, or when you're about to binge. Let's just notice, again, with that compassion and curiosity, what's going on inside for you. And oftentimes in doing that present focused work, we can very gently start to get curious about, where does that come from? Where does that trigger come from? Or where does that sensitivity to that feeling come from? And what's your internal process? Do you shut it down? Do you shame yourself? Where did you learn that? So we can very gently, walk people back in time in a way that makes sense to them. And we do use the term trauma very broadly as professionals, and it was outside of the scope of this presentation to get into all of that. But at the end of the day, nobody comes out of childhood unscathed, quite frankly. We all have experiences with even the best of circumstances where needs go unmet, and that affects our development. So it's our job, I think, to very gently and lovingly and non-judgmentally walk people back in time to just understand how that came to be.
Yeah. And oftentimes too, we can do that in the here and now, right? We can do that in the interpersonal process, either in individual therapy or in group. I'm recalling as you're talking, Dr. Ashley, at an event in group, and there was interpersonal conflict. It was a Yalom-esque interpersonal process group, and there was some healthy conflict going on. And this very aware client said, "Oh my gosh, I'm starting to think about pizza." And we stopped and we really applauded that. And then we were able to flesh out, we applauded the awareness, and then we were able to flesh out that conflict was not allowed in the family of origin. So whenever there was conflict, and there's always going to be conflict in the world, that had to get shut down by self-soothing with food. So that's kind of like even just in the here and now, and that was a really instrumental piece for that individual. And although that's not trauma, we know that that's not a healthy kind of emotional process, because we have to be able to tolerate those kinds of things.
Got it. Okay, in the example of the client who wants to skydive, how do you help them reconcile that their weight may not change as they engage with IE, but other objective/subjective things related to health can? So let me start that over. I want to try again. Give me another shot at that. In the example of the client who wants to skydive, how do you help them reconcile that their weight may not change as they engage with intuitive eating, but other objective/subjective things related to health can, such as being able to walk longer or have improved health overall?
Awesome question. Yeah.
Thanks for letting me do it twice. I apologize.
Yeah, no, of course. I think this is going to be a content or a process over content kind of answer for me. And what I mean by that is my job isn't to help my client get to a certain weight, right? My job isn't to say you can or you can't. My job is to say, I hear that this is important to you. Let's go about this in a really psychologically attuned and healthy way. And what happens, right? So her body may change, her body may not change. My job is to hold a space for how she feels about that, how she processes that experience, whether she can skydive, whether she doesn't skydive, to help her move through the anger and the grief that she feels about her body not changing in that way. And then, as this person is asking, maybe once we move through the process and the anger, all the healthy emotions, then we can maybe have a really productive conversation about, gosh, as you grieve the loss of this particular activity, I wonder what other activities might feed your soul that you might want to open up your heart to and embrace. So my job is not to fixate on whether or not she gets this, but to really support her through her feelings about whether or not she gets this.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you said a lot of the components that I was going to say, because and actually the person that asked the question actually got to the point that I would get to also. And after you grieve and you kind of embrace all of those emotions, you can get to that point of reconciliation. And then it's about, okay, and now what can you do, right? And how can you embrace yourself and support yourself and feed your soul? But it has to be, as a result of that healthy grief process. And we have to be able to have that space for people to enter into and be with them in that space for them to then go to, kind of the next place of fulfillment.
Great, thank you. We have way more questions than we have time to address. So two things. Number one, if which is great. If you suggested a question or presented a question and we didn't get to it, please note that Dr. Ashley and Dr. Julie have their contact information on the last slide. You're welcome. I asked in advance if this was okay, and they said yes. They're happy for you to email them directly and ask that question. There were some specific medical questions that came up, and I think that probably would be better served individually for those responses. So please feel free to reach out to Dr. Julie and Dr. Ashley in that way. And then also know that Dr. Julie and Dr. Ashley get a copy of all of the questions that were submitted today. So it can help them moving forward in other presentations. They can add information that seems to be something that people are greatly interested in. So just know that that's the case as well. The last thing I would say is just let everybody know that we have another webinar. Our next webinar is August 11th, and it's our lovely friend who I know Julie and Ashley know, Dr. Michael Barrett. Yeah, see, he's our fearless leader who retired, and we love him, and we're so excited that he's going to do a webinar for us. And of course, it's a specialty on spirituality, which is a phenomenal topic for him that he's a world-renowned expert in. So we're looking forward to that. So we hope you can join us on August 11th for that. And again, my thanks to Dr. Ashley and Dr. Julie for a phenomenal presentation today. Thank you so much. Everybody take care, be well. Bye-bye until next time.